The process of fading is a very important step for the success of community access. When it's done well, it can increase the odds that natural supports are in place. And what fading actually is when somebody is pursuing a role in the community, the supporter is actually kind of moving away from that individual, so that when it's done well, the natural supports don't even notice that they are no longer being supported by a paid person. You have to make sure that you're very thoughtful and that you do fading over time. There are also lots of considerations to think about when you are fading. One of them has to do with transportation. If you, the supporter, are no longer physically taking somebody there, then how are they going to get there? We often like to start that process from the very beginning and getting people used to a variety of transportation. Maybe it's TARC 3. Maybe it's someplace that's close enough that they can walk. It could also be regular TARC bus. There's many people that we've spent a lot of time learning a particular TARC route to the role that they are pursuing. One of the women that we support was pursuing the role of church member. And Shanae got to a point where she was ready to be independent. Her staff had faded away and she was able to get to church on her own. There were natural supports in place. It was a small church, so those relationships were very organic, and we got to the point where we didn't know how to get her to church. So what we ended up doing was actually there were church members who missed her not being there because she couldn't get there. So the pastor actually drives her to church every day. She uses one of our vans to get to and from church, and it's a beautiful thing, and she's able to be off the Medicaid grid for a portion of her week. Another person that we support, Rufus, we had to spend a lot of time in the fading process thinking about how he was going to get his medications at the right time. He was going to the YMCA, and part of his time there included a time that he was supposed to receive a medication. And so during the fading process, he spent a lot of time with some nurses, and he learned what his medications were, why he took them, what the side effects were, and how he could physically maneuver his hands well enough to take them on his own. However, he needed to figure out how he could get a cup of water. He wasn't able to access physically where the sink was and the cups were. So some of the natural supports that he was able to make stepped in and said, yeah, sure, I can get you a drink of water. And then he was able to be completely independent with that. Another very important piece when you're thinking about fading with somebody is to talk about backup plans. What happens if you show up and nobody's there, or your TARC 3 never shows up? You can't just leave somebody there and not think about those things. So there are many people that we've supported who we had to advocate for them to get their own cell phone. And it wasn't just good enough for them to have access to a cell phone. Many people haven't ever used it before. So we had to find one that would be appropriate for that person. Some people needed larger numbers and larger screens. We helped people program certain numbers into the phone, and we practiced it. We practiced it when we were together with them, when we weren't together with them, and we've included other members of their team so that their residential staff were aware of this, their day training staff, their family and friends were all aware that this was a goal of this person. And over time, people have learned how to do it. And the trick is that you kind of role play. Okay, so let's say your TARC doesn't show up. What are we going to do? And we go over it, and we go over it, and go over it, and go over it. And eventually, when the person that you're supporting, the staff member, and other team members, if necessary, feel comfortable that, yeah, they got this, they know how to do it. When a staff member is actually physically fading away from a role, often you start there with the person, and then you slowly physically move away. So it might be that in the beginning of a class at the YMCA that you all are standing right next to each other. And as they're meeting new people, you're backing away. Maybe you're going to stand behind them. And then a little while later, as they're more comfortable, you're going to be in the back of the room. To the point, the goal is to be able to have the staff not even in the room at all. Maybe they're going to be outside of the classroom, and then maybe they'll be in the lobby. And eventually, you would want staff to be hanging out in the parking lot and watching as they are dropped off and picked up. They may never physically have contact with the person, and that's when you know it's time to fade away completely. When the staff member is outside of the role and never has contact with the participant over a few times, we typically like to use the rule of 3. Once that's happened 3 times with success, then we faded away and that person is now independent in the role. Invisible supports are when you're providing a support to someone and the supporter themselves are trying to be as discreet as possible. When you are able to do this, it will lead to greater autonomy for the person being supported. When staff come on board, I often talk to them about starting to be invisible right from the get-go. We talk a lot about being an agent. And when you think about an agent is somebody whose job is to stand in the background and to promote the person from afar. And when you think about people that you know who are famous, everybody has an agent, but I bet you don't know who that is, what they look like, and what their name is. And that's the whole point of it. And so when you think about supporting somebody in the community, having that mindset right from the beginning is really important and can lead to really good things happening for the person. So when you enter a role right from the beginning, the staff person is physically behind the person being supported. They are speaking in a manner that is not to say, oh, hi, my name is, and this is so-and-so. When somebody is starting a role, having the supporter come in from the get-go, being physically behind the person, sets up the stage for success later on. And it even makes the process of fading much easier. We support a woman named Angie to attend a bike night every week, and she is the role of regular there. And when she is there, her support staff is not always right there with her. When they first got there, Angie's a shy person, and so their role was to introduce her to other people and then back away. And right now, what happens when Angie goes to bike night is she goes in by herself, and the supporter is there in case she needs it. She is somebody who needs a lot of physical support, and she has a phone. And when she needs a supporter to be there for something that she is unable to physically do, she is able to call them. But it varies from person to person as to what kind of invisible supports they need. But what I can say is that when you set that up from the beginning, that the focus person is the individual being supported, fading away can happen a lot quicker under the right circumstances. When starting up community access with somebody, it's important for the provider to be aware that there is always going to be time that needs to be spent in order to be successful without the participant there. For example, you may be working with somebody where physical accessibility is really important. So a community access specialist may need to spend time checking out a place beforehand just to make sure it is accessible. There's also time when you may need to speak with other people without the participant there. There's always time that's unbillable, and that's what leads to successful community access down the line. When we were looking for a role for Donna to pursue around being a regular at the mall walking club, it was important that I go and I see what that looks like first so that I can explain it to her. Because had we shown up with it being new to both of us, the chances of that being successful for her were pretty slim. She needed to have a picture in her head of what that meant. My job as Donna's community access specialist was to set her up for success. And so I spent an entire day by myself at the mall walking club looking around and thinking about, where does everybody else park? How long do people spend actually walking? And what I learned from that was actually the best part of the mall walking club is not the walking. It's the hanging out at the food court afterwards. And that's when people really got to know each other. That's when they shared food and drink and games with one another. And that was the part that was of most interest to Donna. without me having seen that, we likely would have shown up, walked a lap, and left. And so, in order to have a successful community access program, you'll need to build in to the model of your program time where people will be without the participants.